Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm here with Frank Garenser. He is the CEO and co-founder of Trios Corporation. Frank, we were just getting into, before the break, kind of the economic impacts of international students, what they bring to the table. You talked a little bit about their
what they bring to Canada is...
Yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
What they bring to Canada is huge. It's $22 billion of gross domestic product is the value of international students in Canada as a whole, attending universities, community colleges, public colleges, private colleges onto here. That's bigger than, I believe, than forestry and fishing combined for the entire country onto here. So it's a major area for us. And the other part that's critical that's onto here is I'm collecting a little bit of this white stuff on my chin on here. I noticed, Sony, that you have a little bit yourself on it. Your organization is Boom and Bust. Well, I'm a boomer as well, right to the prime of it. As we all end up retiring on it, who's going to fill back in those jobs?
Right.
Canadians don't make enough Canadians. That tends to be right across the entire Western world onto here. Our only growth is through immigration. In fact, I'm a product of immigration. My parents, my mom came here in the Hungarian Revolution. And so I grew up in a Canadian culture with a very strong Hungarian connection that was associated with doing it. And I've done just fine. Growing up over here, it's a beautiful country. There's so many opportunities for people to do it. And you've seen the same thing with group after group after group. I was talking to another person the other day, and they were explaining that they were one of the Vietnamese boat people. And here he is, and he's running 3 or 4 businesses. It's 20 years later or 30 years later. I mean, Canada is a wonderful place for opportunity, and international students are one of the best gateways to be able to do it. I'm not sure if I covered that just before the break, but international students, when they come in, they study for 2 to 4 years at a university or a college. And then after that, they're allowed to work for 3 years. So they end up becoming Canadian culturalized by rooting for our sports teams, knowing what our communities are all about, getting Canadian work experience, getting a Canadian credential, often on top of their credential they might have had back home. Because a lot of our students come with degrees already from other countries. And so they fit really well. I, in my own organization, have hundreds of employees that actually are trained, they're internationally educated professionals that are onto here. I'm a great example of us believing in what our own product is. And they didn't get necessarily trained by me. Many of them have.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I guess the flip side of that, and perhaps the straw on the camel's back for the federal government was concerns about the impact on our housing situation, particularly in places like Toronto. Is that something that you were concerned about as well?
I think you've got a good analogy on it, but I don't think it was a straw on the camel's back. I think it was a bale of hay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was a bigger issue that's on it, just on the volume of what we've got. The biggest issue that we have involved on housing is that as a series of governments, we haven't created the environment to create enough housing for decades. Right now we're at the current scenario. If you look back just over the last 5 years into the press, the reason why we have a housing crisis is we got international people buying all the houses. Right. Let's put a tax onto that to stop that. Then the other issue that we have, there's a whole bunch of other issues. The most current issue is it's international students. There's too many international students, and that's the reason why they're driving up the housing costs that are onto it. But in our experience, the international students are living in a far tighter environment than a typical Canadian is.
Right.
A 3-bedroom home in Canada is going to cover 4 people onto here. International students would have quite a lot more. And if you bring it back and you say, well, why, that's a lot of overcrowding, just flip it back to when you were 18, 19, 20, okay? And you'd take a trip to Europe and be quite happy staying in a hostel. Well, you might not be doing that today. And when I talk to the international students that are attending in our schools, they're saying they're quite happy to be involved in that. They're used to living in larger families at home, and they're quite comfortable on where they are. And many of them are actually living with family here as well. So if you reduce what the numbers are, those living with family aren't necessarily going to be, you're not going to create any new housing by not having those international students. So I think there's some errors in the assumptions that are here, which will be borne out over the next year or two as you see the numbers all play in.
No, I think you raise a good point that, there's many different factors for our housing crisis. So to blame it all on international students may not be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I do want to talk a little bit. Maybe we'll take this one after the break, but I just want to frame it for you and for our viewers as well. I'd love to get a sense of the interaction. You're obviously, you're not only a CEO, but you're an advocate for your business and what it does for the Canadian economy. So we'd love to talk a little bit about some of the conversations you've had and how you've advocated for that. I want to give you the full opportunity, so we're going to take a brief break right now. We'll be back after these messages.